The hum of fluorescent lights echoed faintly through the empty office, a low drone that seemed louder in the stillness of the night. Mia's fingers hovered over her keyboard, eyes scanning the dimly lit rows of cubicles stretching beyond her desk. She was the only one working, or so she thought. It was her fourth late night this week, the pressure of an upcoming report leaving her no choice. The others had gone hours ago, their absence leaving a void Mia couldn't quite explain. The office always felt lifeless after dark, but tonight, it seemed oppressive. The air was thick, and the shadows cast by the overhead lights danced unnaturally against the walls. Mia stretched her neck, glancing at the clock on her monitor. 11:47 p.m. She sighed and stood, deciding a quick break would clear her head. As she made her way to the kitchenette, her footsteps echoed on the tile floor. She paused near the break room, where a faint murmur caught her attention. At first, she thought it was the hum of the air conditioning, but the sound grew clearer. Whispers. Mia stepped closer, her pulse quickening. She leaned around the corner, expecting to see someone chatting quietly, but the room was empty. The sound abruptly stopped, leaving only silence. She shook her head, scolding herself for working too late. Lack of sleep was messing with her. Grabbing a cup of water, Mia turned to head back to her desk, only to freeze mid-step. Across the office, faint silhouettes sat hunched over desks she was sure had been vacant earlier. Their postures were rigid, their movements mechanical, as their fingers tapped away at keyboards in unison. Mia frowned. Who could possibly still be here? She squinted, trying to make out the faces, but the distance and dim lighting blurred the details. The silhouettes didn't move except to type, their heads never lifting. Unease prickled at the back of her neck, but she forced herself to move. Back at her desk, she settled into her chair and tried to focus, but her fingers trembled over the keys. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her. Mia arrived early the next morning, groggy but eager to push the strange events of the previous night out of her mind. The office was bright and bustling with the usual chatter of coworkers. It was easier to dismiss the silhouettes as an exhausted hallucination when surrounded by the clamor of ringing phones and clacking keyboards. By lunchtime, she had almost convinced herself that she had imagined everything. Almost. But the memory of the synchronized typing and the faint whispers nagged at her. Later that night, as the office emptied once again, Mia found herself alone. Or so she thought. She glanced at the clock. 10:32 p.m. Determined to wrap up her work quickly, she dove into her spreadsheets, her mind laser-focused until the sound of muffled voices broke her concentration. Her heart raced. The whispers were back, louder this time, coming from the break room. Mia hesitated but forced herself to investigate. She stood just outside the doorway, straining to hear. The voices were distinct now. Fragments of sentences she couldn't quite piece together. Deadline, no choice, they never leave. She stepped into the room. The whispers stopped. The sudden silence was suffocating. Mia scanned the room, empty, just like before. When she returned to her desk, she noticed something that sent a chill through her. The desks she had seen occupied last night were now empty again, their surfaces perfectly clean, as if no one had used them in years. The next day, Mia mentioned the odd occurrences to her coworker Tom over coffee. He laughed, brushing it off. You're overworked. Everyone gets weird after a couple of late nights. Just take a break. Mia tried to smile, but the unease wouldn't leave. She thought of Mr. Keller's comment the other day. True dedication doesn't go unnoticed. It didn't feel like a compliment anymore. Friday evening came, and Mia promised herself she wouldn't stay late again. Yet, as the clock neared 9 p.m., she was still at her desk, buried under spreadsheets. A gust of cold air swept through the office, making her shiver. She stood to grab her jacket and noticed a file cabinet drawer ajar in the far corner. Curiosity got the better of her. As she rifled through its contents, she found an old photograph tucked between two folders. The image showed a group of employees gathered in a conference room. She scanned the faces and froze. Among them were Mark, Julie, and others she recognized as the overtime workers. They looked exactly the same as they did now. Same hairstyles, same clothes. The photo was dated March 2008. Her stomach churned. It didn't make sense. How could they look unchanged after 15 years? Determined to make sense of it, Mia searched for more information. She dug through archived emails and internal reports, but found nothing about the employees in the photo. It was as if they didn't exist. That night, she tried to leave the office earlier, but found herself strangely unable to. Every time she packed her bag and approached the elevator, a deep sense of guilt washed over her, as if abandoning her desk was a betrayal. Hours later, as she stared at her monitor, her vision blurred and her head throbbed. The shadows around her seemed to stretch and ripple, closing in. She looked toward the desks where the overtime workers sat. Their silhouettes were there again, typing in eerie synchronization. Mia backed away from her desk, the photograph clenched tightly in her hand. Something was deeply, horribly wrong. By Saturday night, Mia couldn't fight her curiosity or her growing fear any longer. She stayed late once again, determined to find answers. The office was deathly quiet as she walked past the cubicles. Her pulse quickened as she reached the supply closet. The air was colder here, and her hand shook as she pushed open the door. At first, it seemed like an ordinary closet, but as Mia moved aside a stack of boxes, her fingers grazed something metallic, a hidden handle. She pulled, and the back panel of the closet swung open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest, but the need to know overcame her fear. She crept down the stairs, the faint hum of machinery growing louder with each step. At the bottom, she found a disused conference room. Dust-coated chairs surrounded a long table, and the walls were covered with faded posters bearing motivational slogans. Work smarter, not harder. On the table lay a stack of old documents and a tape recorder. Mia pressed play, and a distorted voice crackled to life. Experiment 42. Objective: optimize employee productivity through dedication rituals. Phase 1 successful. Subjects tethered indefinitely to workstations. Side effects acceptable. Mia's blood ran cold. The papers confirmed her worst fears. The company had conducted occult experiments, binding employees' souls to the office in exchange for eternal productivity. A noise behind her made her whirl around. Footsteps echoed on the stairs. She backed away, clutching the documents. The door creaked open, and one of the overtime workers entered, their face expressionless and eyes hollow. The lights flickered. More footsteps followed. Mia bolted for the stairs, but her path was blocked by more of the overtime workers. Their faces were blank, their heads tilted unnaturally as they moved closer. "Join us," one of them murmured, their voice hollow and robotic. She stumbled backward into the conference room as Mr. Keller entered, his calm smile sending a wave of dread through her. He looked almost pleased. "You've been working so hard, Mia," he said. "That kind of dedication deserves to be rewarded." What is this?" she stammered, holding up the documents. "An investment," Keller replied smoothly. "We value hard work here. So much, so that we make sure it lasts forever." Mia's mind raced. Was this why she couldn't leave the office? Was she already becoming one of them? Keller stepped closer, his eyes glinting with an unnatural light. "You have a choice," he said. "Stay and join the team, or, well, let's just say retirement isn't as peaceful as it sounds." The overtime workers closed in, their hollow gazes fixed on her. The air grew heavier, suffocating her as her vision blurred. She stumbled toward the exit, but Keller's voice stopped her. "Think carefully, Mia. You've already proven your dedication. Why not make it eternal?" Her scream echoed through the empty halls as the door slammed shut. Months later, the office seemed unchanged. New hires buzzed about deadlines and projects, unaware of the building's dark history. But some employees began to notice a strange woman sitting in the far corner. She rarely spoke, her face pale and emotionless. Her desk lamp stayed on long after everyone else left. "Who's that?" a curious intern asked one day. "That's Mia," someone replied. "She's dedicated." The intern frowned. "Dedicated to what?" No one answered. The office was quiet, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural in a place usually teeming with life. Lisa sat alone at her desk, illuminated by the dim blue light of her monitor. The clock on the wall read 11:27 p.m., and the silence was broken only by the rhythmic tapping of her keyboard. The marketing campaign was due by morning, and Lisa was determined to finish it. Everyone else had long since gone home, leaving her to the vast, empty expanse of the office. She wasn't unfamiliar with this routine. Working late had become second nature. Still, tonight felt different. She rubbed her temples and stood to stretch. Her jacket, draped over the back of her chair, slipped to the floor, and as she bent to pick it up, a chill swept through the room. It wasn't just the air conditioning. This was colder, sharper, like a draft from an open window. Frowning, she glanced around. The office was airtight, its modern design ensuring no stray breezes. She followed the chill instinctively, her steps echoing as she approached the supply closet at the far end of the room. The door creaked as she opened it, revealing shelves of neatly arranged office supplies. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, but the chill was stronger here, and a faint sound, almost a whisper, seemed to emanate from within. Her eyes fell on the back wall. Something was off. The paneling didn't quite align with the rest of the room. Stepping closer, she pressed her hand against the wall and felt a faint vibration. Without thinking, she pushed, and the panel gave way with a low groan, revealing a narrow, dark doorway. A shiver ran down her spine as she peered inside. Stairs led downward, disappearing into pitch blackness. The draft flowed up from below, carrying with it a strange, faintly metallic smell. Lisa's hand hovered over the doorframe, her instinct screaming to close it and walk away. After a moment of hesitation, she stepped back and let the panel fall shut. Shaking her head, she turned and hurried back to her desk. Whatever lay beyond that door could wait. The next morning, the office buzzed with life, phones ringing and voices overlapping in the usual chaos of a corporate environment. Lisa sat at her desk, her coffee untouched. She stared blankly at her monitor, replaying the events of the previous night in her mind. The door, the stairs, the strange, cold draft. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it as a mix of exhaustion and overwork. It wasn't like her to let late nights get to her, but something about that hidden door felt off. Her thoughts were interrupted by the cheerful voice of Daniel, her closest coworker. "Hey, Lisa, burning the midnight oil again," he teased, leaning against the edge of her desk. "Yeah," she replied with a weak smile. "Just had to finish that campaign. You're gonna work yourself to death, you know," he said, chuckling. Lisa tried to laugh, but her mind lingered on his words. The memory of the stairs, stretching endlessly into darkness, made her stomach twist. That evening, the office began to clear out again as the workday ended. Lisa stayed behind, as usual, but as the hours passed, she couldn't focus. The whispers started softly this time, faint enough that she thought they might be in her head. She glanced around. The office was empty, but the sound grew louder, coming from no discernible direction. Lisa stood, her heart pounding, and walked toward the kitchenette to calm herself. The lights flickered as she passed through the rows of cubicles. In the kitchenette, she heard a faint shuffling noise. "Hello," she called, her voice wavering. The sound stopped. She spun around, her eyes scanning the shadows, but no one was there. Lisa returned to her desk, her unease growing. She glanced at her phone, tempted to call Daniel, but stopped herself. He would laugh it off. When Mr. Carmichael passed by on his way out, he paused, his usual polished smile lingering too long. "Still here?" he asked. "Yeah, just finishing up," Lisa replied, trying to sound casual. "Good," he said softly. "The company appreciates your dedication." As he walked away, her pulse quickened. Something about the way he said it felt less like praise and more like a warning. The following night, Lisa couldn't resist the pull of the hidden door. She told herself it was nothing, just a curiosity to satisfy so she could focus again. But deep down, she knew there was more to it. Once the office was quiet, she made her way to the supply closet. The air felt colder as she opened the panel. The dark staircase beckoned, its faint metallic smell now stronger, almost overwhelming. Lisa turned on her phone's flashlight and began descending. The steps groaned under her weight, the sound echoing unnaturally. At the bottom, the narrow staircase opened into a long corridor. The walls were lined with faded photographs in tarnished frames. Lisa's light caught the faces of employees, dozens of them, staring out with wide, terrified eyes. Some were smudged, their features distorted into grotesque expressions. Her breath quickened. "What is this place?" she whispered. At the end of the corridor, she found a large, decrepit conference room. The air was damp and heavy, the faint hum of machinery coming from somewhere unseen. In the center of the room stood a long table, covered in dust and strange symbols etched into its surface. On the table were scattered papers and a small tape recorder. With shaking hands, Lisa pressed play. A distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "Ritual successful. Employee dedication maximized. Productivity eternal. Side effects contained." Lisa's stomach lurched. The symbols, the photographs, the whispers, everything began to connect. Her flashlight flickered. From behind her came the unmistakable sound of footsteps descending the stairs. Lisa grabbed a stack of papers from the table and bolted for the corridor. Her light caught the photos again as she ran, their expressions seeming to follow her. She reached the stairs and scrambled back to the office, slamming the hidden door shut behind her. Lisa sat at her desk, shaking, her mind racing with what she had just seen. She wanted to leave, to run, but her body wouldn't move. It was as though the office itself wouldn't let her go. When she finally summoned the courage to leave, her keycard didn't work. The elevator wouldn't respond. The exit doors refused to budge, no matter how hard she pushed. "Help," she muttered under her breath. But the office was silent. The whispers returned, louder than before. They weren't just murmurs now. They were voices, calling her name. Lisa's phone buzzed, and she nearly screamed. It was Daniel. "Hey, you okay? You left your lights on earlier," his message read. She typed back, her fingers trembling. "I can't leave. Something's wrong. Please come back." No reply came. The whispers grew into footsteps. Lisa ducked under her desk, her heart pounding as the hidden door creaked open. From her vantage point, she saw shadowy figures emerge, their movements slow and unnatural. She stifled a gasp as they began roaming the office. Their faces were blank, as if carved from shadow, but their presence was suffocating. Her phone buzzed again. "I'll check on you tomorrow," Daniel's message read. Lisa felt a tear roll down her cheek as the shadowy figures passed her desk. Mr. Carmichael's voice rang out, calm and unbothered. "Don't be afraid, Lisa. This is what true dedication looks like." The figures turned toward her, their blank faces fixed on her hiding spot. Lisa bolted from under her desk, but the shadowy figures closed in. Mr. Carmichael stood calmly by the hidden door, his smile chillingly calm. "Lisa, there's no need to run," he said. "You've proven yourself. You're exactly what this company needs." "What are you talking about?" she demanded, backing away. "Loyalty, dedication, the willingness to give everything. Isn't that what you want?" His tone was soothing, but his words were laced with menace. The figures surrounded her, their presence pressing against her mind. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. Carmichael gestured to the hidden door. "It's simple. Join us, and you'll never have to worry about leaving again. Or you can try to fight. But no one escapes this company, Lisa." Her eyes darted to the papers she had grabbed from the conference room. Among the strange symbols, one caught her attention, an inverted marking she hadn't noticed before. Desperation overtook her. Lisa raised the paper and shouted the symbol's name, her voice trembling. The air rippled as the shadowy figures recoiled, their forms faltering. Carmichael's smile twisted into a sneer. "You're making a mistake," he said coldly. Lisa didn't stop. She ran for the exit, the figures clawing at the air around her. The office doors flung open as she screamed, her voice lost in the cacophony of whispers. The next morning, the office hummed with normalcy. Employees chatted by the water cooler, oblivious to the events of the previous night. But Lisa's desk sat empty. Her computer screen glowed faintly, displaying an unfinished email draft. Her coffee mug, still full, sat untouched. "Where's Lisa?" someone asked. "She left early," Daniel said, though his voice faltered. That night, the janitor worked late, cleaning the empty office. As he passed Lisa's desk, he paused. A faint glow came from her monitor. He leaned closer and froze. The reflection on the screen wasn't his own. The office was a hum of controlled chaos, a maze of gray cubicles filled with the rhythmic tapping of keyboards and muffled voices. Sarah adjusted her headset, stealing a glance at the clock. 12:47 p.m., almost lunchtime. She was still getting used to the routine of her new job, but so far, things had been smooth, if not a little overwhelming. As the clock hit 1 p.m., Sarah grabbed her lunch and decided to eat at her desk. She had a project to finish and wanted to get ahead. While searching for some extra paper in the cabinet above her, she came across a dusty binder filled with old company records. Curiosity got the better of her. She flipped through the pages, skimming old charts, meeting notes, and faded photographs of previous teams. One photo caught her eye. A group of employees standing together in what looked like the break room. Most of the people were smiling, but one face stood out. A young man no older than 20 stared at the camera with wide eyes. His expression wasn't happy, it was terrified. His name tag, just barely legible, read, "Alex, intern." "Strange," Sarah muttered, pulling the photo out for a closer look. "What's that?" came a voice behind her. She jumped, dropping the binder. It was Ryan, her coworker from the next cubicle over. His friendly smile faltered when he saw the photograph. "Oh, that's Alex," Ryan said, his tone guarded. "Who is he?" Sarah asked. Ryan shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Just an old intern. He left years ago." His reply felt rehearsed, too quick to be genuine. Before she could press further, he changed the subject. "Anyway, let me know if you need help with anything." As Ryan walked away, Sarah stared at the photograph again. Alex's terrified expression stayed with her, a quiet unease settling in her chest. The next day, Sarah arrived at the office early, determined to shake the unease from the day before. She placed the photograph of Alex in her drawer, resolving to forget about it and focus on her work. But the strange occurrences began almost immediately. Her first meeting of the day was interrupted by the sound of faint laughter. It came from the direction of the empty conference room at the end of the hall. The noise was so soft that Sarah wasn't sure if anyone else noticed. She glanced around, but her co-workers carried on as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Later, as she returned from the break room, she found her papers shuffled into a messy pile. Her heart sank. She had left them neatly stacked. By the time lunch rolled around, Sarah couldn't take the growing tension. She leaned over the divider between her cubicle and Ryan's. "Hey, can I ask you something?" Ryan looked up, his face unusually tense. "It's about Alex," she said, lowering her voice. "That photo." "Don't," Ryan interrupted, his voice sharper than she'd expected. "It's just old office stuff. Let it go." The edge in his tone silenced her, but it only made her more suspicious. As the day stretched into evening, Sarah stayed late to finish a report. The office grew quieter, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights taking over. She was lost in her work when she heard it again, laughter. This time, it was clearer and closer. It came from behind her. She spun around, her chair creaking loudly in the silence. No one was there. Her eyes darted toward the empty conference room. She sat frozen, staring at the dimly lit hallway until her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a work email from Mr. Henderson. "Great job staying late. Dedication pays off. See you tomorrow." The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. The following evening, Sarah stayed late again, partially to finish her work, but mostly because of a gnawing curiosity. The office was deathly quiet as she wandered toward the hall where the laughter had come from. This time, she noticed a faint flicker of light seeping out from under the door to a room she didn't recognize. Sarah pushed open the door and stepped inside. The break room was unlike the rest of the office. It was coated in dust, with stale coffee cups sitting on the counter and faded motivational posters curling at the edges. The fluorescent lights buzzed dimly, flickering sporadically. On the wall, above the sink, Sarah noticed something carved into the plaster. She stepped closer, squinting to read it. Alex. The letters were jagged and uneven, as if they'd been scratched in desperation. Her fingers hovered over the carving, and the air in the room seemed to shift. Behind her, the door creaked shut. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. A faint sound answered, like a distant whisper. Her heart raced as she scanned the room, her breath visible in the cold air. She grabbed the doorknob and yanked it open, stumbling back into the hallway. The next morning, Sarah confronted Ryan again. "There's something wrong here," she said, showing him a photo of the carving she'd taken with her phone. "What aren't you telling me?" Ryan's face went pale. He looked around, as if afraid someone might overhear. "Drop it, Sarah," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Trust me, you don't want to know." Sarah couldn't let it go. The carving, the laughter, Alex's terrified face, they gnawed at her, refusing to be ignored. The office had a small storage area, filled with old desks and cabinets. Sarah waited until the evening when most of her co-workers had gone home, then snuck inside. She rummaged through dusty folders and forgotten documents until something caught her eye. A small, battered journal sat in the bottom drawer of an old desk. She opened it and saw Alex's name scrawled on the inside cover. The first few pages were innocuous, notes about meetings and daily tasks. But as she read further, the entries grew darker. "The office feels different at night. I hear whispers. I think they're calling my name. They're watching me." The final pages were a frantic mess of scribbles. "Trapped. The doors won't open. The lights won't stay on. Henderson knows. He's part of it." Sarah's stomach churned. She stuffed the journal into her bag and fled the storage room. The next morning, she showed it to Ryan. He read the pages with trembling hands before shoving it back at her. "Why did you find this?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Because I need to know the truth," Sarah replied. "What happened to Alex?" Ryan ran a hand through his hair, glancing nervously at the hallway. "He disappeared. They said he left. But I don't think he ever got out." "What do you mean?" Ryan leaned closer. "Once you notice them, they notice you too. And when that happens," he trailed off, his voice breaking. Sarah sat frozen, clutching the journal. That night, Sarah stayed behind again, clutching the journal like a lifeline. She wasn't leaving without answers. The office was unnaturally quiet, the air heavy with a palpable tension. She opened the break room door. The air inside was frigid, and her breath came out in soft puffs. "Alex," she called softly. The lights flickered, and she saw him. Alex's translucent form appeared near the carving on the wall. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow and desperate. He opened his mouth, but his voice was faint and broken, like a distant echo. "Help me," he pleaded. "Don't let it take you too." Before she could respond, a shadow loomed behind her. "Still here, Sarah." Mr. Henderson's voice was calm, almost amused. She spun around to see him, standing in the doorway, his silhouette unnaturally tall in the flickering light. Henderson smiled. "Alex was chosen, just as you've been chosen." "What are you talking about?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling. "The office requires dedication," he replied smoothly. "And some of us are more dedicated than others." The shadows in the room stretched toward her, cold and suffocating. Behind her, Alex's voice whispered one last time, "Run." Sarah never returned to the office. She quit the next morning, refusing to answer any calls or emails from her coworkers. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow felt too dark, every creak too deliberate. At the office, her desk was cleared, her name erased from the company records. Later that evening, a new hire stumbled upon a photograph in an old binder. The young man in the picture stared back with wide, terrified eyes. The name tag read, Alex, in turn,